Welcome to the future. PBS Digital.
Did you know that over a third of all the seafood consumed in the United States of America is harvested from coastal Louisiana? Did you know that Louisiana produces almost a third of America's natural gas? In fact, over a quarter of all the crude oil and natural gas our nation uses moves through Louisiana's coastal wetlands. And through Louisiana's ports come a surprising percentage of our imported consumer goods. And as for that coffee we enjoy every day, most of it passes through the port of New Orleans. It's not hard to imagine what would happen if coastal Louisiana's infrastructure was crippled by another major storm. So if you think that Louisiana's coastal land loss, one of the biggest ongoing environmental catastrophes in the world, doesn't affect you no matter where you live in the United States, think again.
This little spit of land down here is really important to the well-being of this country. We're number one in shrimp. We're number one in oysters, number one in crawfish, number two in finfish, number two in crabs. 35 to 40% of the domestic seafood production in this country comes from Louisiana.
From Pittsburgh to Tulsa, and every place in between, Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Lexington, Memphis, Little Rock. All of these cities are served and depend on cargo shipped into the state of Louisiana and into the port of New Orleans.
We basically produce or have energy, oil and gas coming through Louisiana, pipelines and things like that, that fuels the rest of the nation.
Coastal Louisiana is very different from the rest of the states. It's America's coastal heartland. It's a coastline that's challenged today by land loss. And we hear the numbers, a football field every 30 minutes. The bigger picture is we've lost 1,000 square miles of land in the last 50 years. We'll lose 500 more square miles if we don't do anything about it.
If what Louisiana provides to the rest of the United States is so important, how did we let this happen? It came in response to a national disaster.
In 1927, as a response to this great flood, we built a levee system not to protect Louisiana from rainfall that fell on Louisiana, but it was to safely convey floods that happened in the central part of our country to the Gulf of Mexico. Worked really, really well. But inadvertently, what we did was prevent the annual overflows that nourished our wetlands.
We've built levees on the Mississippi River, interrupted the sediment input into the marshes. We've cut canals throughout the wetlands, allowing salt water to intrude far up into freshwater areas. 7,000 years, Mississippi River built this place that we live on. Within the last 75 years, we destroyed it.
For thousands of years, the Mississippi River shifted, building the marshes, ridges, and barrier islands of coastal Louisiana as it sought the quickest route to the Gulf of Mexico. Then we put the river in a straitjacket.
Basically, we've harnessed that delta, not allowed the river to change, and so this has become an eroding environment. Nobody disagrees that this is a time-sensitive issue. You know, when you're losing 20 to 25 square miles a year, if you're not creating 20 to 25 square miles a year, you know, you're losing the battle and it's going away.
For thousands of years, the coastal lands built by the river provided protection from hurricanes. With less and less coastal lands creating a storm buffer, more and more of this vital Louisiana corridor is exposed. And recent disasters have shown us that man-made levees cannot provide enough protection.
The levees without the wetlands create even a false sense of security. If you don't create and maintain the marshes and the barrier islands in front of them, also that levees in the Gulf of Mexico, you have to build it bigger. We probably can't build it fast enough.
Without coastal protection and without the estuarine system being normally and naturally in place, we don't have a system that breaks down surges from hurricanes.
Barrier islands and marshes and ridgelands in southeastern Louisiana's estuary system create friction that slows winds and lessens storm surge.
We're going to have to get far more aggressive. We're going to have, you know, multiple lines of defense. We're going to have to, of course, save our barrier islands. We're going to have to build more friction in the estuary. We're going to have to build more marshes. We're going to have to restore more ridges. It's not just marshes. It's not just ridges. It's not just barrier islands. It's all of the above.
But can we stabilize America's coastal heartland? Can we rebuild land now? There is a solution. The methodology goes by many names.
Pipeline sediment delivery.
Sediment slurries.
Dedicated dredging.
Pipeline slurry.
Dredge bowl.
Dedicated dredge project.
Dredge spoil.
Now it's affectionately called long-distance distribution by pipeline or whatever.
No matter what we call it, put simply, it's harvesting material from one place to restore another. Massive projects that use this pipeline sediment delivery methodology to build land as rapidly as our coast needs rebuilding are happening right now around the world.
Dredge basically is a giant floating vacuum cleaner. It has a head that goes down that cuts the bottom up, and then it pumps that sand mixed up with water to any location that we really want to deposit it.
In the past, you know, this technology has been used to destroy the environment. You know, you're dredging channels and you're taking this material and you're taking it out of the system. What we're doing is we're taking material and bringing it into the system.
But how do we know that pipeline sediment delivery will work in an ecosystem as decimated as Louisiana's coast?
Initially, we became interested in this technique of adding sediment slurries to deteriorating marshes in order to revitalize them purely by accident. During the filling of a gas pipeline canal, the sediments that were hydraulically pumped into this pipeline overflowed the confines of the right-of-way and spilled into an adjacent salt marsh that was in a high state of deterioration. And lo and behold, this sediment revitalized this particular marsh.
In marsh restoration, a mix of sediment and water called slurry is fanned out across the restoration area. The pipeline is moved along the site, delivering slurry until the desired elevation is achieved. Soon, vegetation returns, along with animals and marine life.
We found that this particular methodology of adding sediment slurries to wetlands that are subsiding at a very high rate can be a way of remediating and restoring the health and vigor of these coastal wetlands, especially salt marshes. There are definitely areas of marsh that would not come back if sediment was not added.
Just as important are the ridgelands.
But we have Chenier ridges, maritime forest ridges, and distributary ridges here in the Mississippi Deltaic Plain.
These natural formations left behind by shifting bayous and rivers are solid underfoot and studded with trees.
When you get up to these natural ridges, they really provide the only relief in the landscape. We're losing these natural ridges just like we're losing marshes in barrier islands, but most of them have been negatively impacted by man.
Ridges provide critical elevation of sometimes just a few feet. In this flat terrain, even such minimal elevation can greatly lessen the impact of storms. This ridge is being built to create bird habitat, but will also serve to protect oil and gas infrastructure.
When the hurricanes of 2005 came through and the service area of the port was shut down, there was over $1 billion a day of product of oil and gas made unavailable to the American public. We were doing coastal restoration before it was cool to do coastal restoration, before people knew what it was, because we just knew we needed to do this to save ourselves. We take a hydraulic dredge, a suction dredge, and we move sediments for 2-3 miles, not a big thing.
First, a ridge to be restored is identified. Then slurry material is added via pipeline. Once the material settles, it's shaped. Restored ridges are planted to reforest the area.
The Chenier woods, or maritime forests, are extremely important for a number of species of birds. Shorebirds, wading birds, raptors. Just as important are the tons or the millions of migratory birds that come through coastal Louisiana each year. So they're going to spend their time here twice a year. In the spring, fattening up to continue their journey north, and in the fall, fattening up to continue their journey south.
Beyond marshes and ridgelands is the coast's last buffer to the sea, barrier islands, many of which have eroded to the point of completely disappearing.
Barrier islands mitigate wave impacts when storms come. People refer to them as the first line of defense for storms. We're standing right now on what everyone calls Ile de Nier, or Last Island. It's the last piece of land between Louisiana and the Gulf of Mexico.
Once the appropriate harvest site is found, a dredge barge is moved into place. When harvesting begins, the cutter head descends. A slurry is sucked in and travels along the pipeline to the restoration site. As the slurry exits the pipe, it is formed by machinery. As one area settles, the pipeline and machinery are shifted to pump in an adjacent area. Once the site is raised to the specified elevation, all machinery is removed, leaving a minimal human footprint.
When the project is finished, any damage that we did and actually building the project should be part of the restoration. For instance, in this project where you see the road constructed for access, that will all be repaired when we leave. And all these dikes you see behind and pipes, that's all going to be removed, that's all going to be shaped down and graded to create a design template of a natural dune system.
Wooden fences are erected to catch sand, creating dunes to further anchor and elevate the island. The restored ecosystem quickly becomes a natural habitat and the first line of defense against storms once again.
Standing on top of a completed dune, you can see these dunes in the back. Those hills that you see with all the vegetation on them, underneath in the middle of it is a fence just like this. These here are already started to make dunes, just in the short time they've been here. Between them, this sand dune is starting to build, and on each side also. So it works pretty fast. On a job like this, you can see you have really built something that's going to do some good, and there's a lot of satisfaction in that.
This landscape was predicted to be washed away by the year 2005, no longer in existence. And here, through pipeline slurry, we've extended the life of this barrier island by more than 30 years. We came back and we did an assessment of these projects, and you know what? The ones that were storm resistant were the ones that were made of sediment and vegetated. That was a lesson that was learned from Katrina, and we were blown away by that.
There are concerns to be addressed regarding the use of pipeline sediment delivery to rebuild environmentally sensitive wetlands. The right materials, whether fine silt or heavier sand, must be chosen according to the area to be restored. And harvested materials must be monitored for contaminants.
Sediment is relatively clean. We've been studying the sediment since 1977. And it's gotten cleaner and cleaner over the years.
And what about the availability of sediment? The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is constantly dredging the Mississippi River for navigation. Historically, all of that sediment has gone to waste.
We can take dredged spoil from the Mississippi River and rebuild the coastlines. By taking that same dredged spoil, we in effect are deepening the channel to allow bigger and newer and faster and larger ships to come into the Mississippi River and to the port of New Orleans. And at the same time, the dredged spoil rebuilds the coastal resources that we've lost over the years.
They dredge 70 million cubic yards of sediment out of the Mississippi River annually, out of the Mississippi and Chaffalaya combined. 70 million.
And it just goes to waste.
It's spilled off the continental shelf.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's...
You may ask the question, is there enough material to do it? Absolutely. So we shouldn't even be in that game. We have plenty of material to start the largest coastal restoration program, not only in the country, but on the planet. We look at the history of dredging in Louisiana. It tells us that we need to take that technology, sure, retool it from navigation dredging to restoration dredging, and that's the future. To me, that's the future industry, restoration dredging.
The methodology that's required for our coast is being applied in other parts of the world. Africa uses it.
Canada, Mexico,
Holland,
Venezuela, Chile,
Nigeria,
Kuwait, Iraq.
But it's just not being used effectively here in Louisiana.
For every gallon or every barrel of oil that's produced out of Nigeria, the government has mandated that the oil companies have to restore part of the Niger Delta.
Delivering sediment via pipeline works, but if the land was originally built by annual overflows of the Mississippi, why not mimic the river and rebuild using large river diversions?
The bad part is that the Mississippi River only carries about a third of the sediment load today that it did historically when building coastal Louisiana.
What we're seeing is a decrease in the suspended sediment in the water column in the Mississippi River. We stabilized the banks along the Mississippi River. As you can see right here, we've got concrete in this section here. Well, none of that gets eroded and put back into the river. So basically, since about 1950, the estimate is about a 2/3 to 3/4 decrease in suspended sediment load.
What do we choose? Diversion or dredging project? Which can build land faster? The dredging can build land faster. You know, the diversion can help maintain that land, but to build that land fast enough, dredging technology is the only way to do it.
With a pipeline sediment delivery, we can restore the wetlands, the ridges, the barrier islands, but we'd have to maintain it, have to sustain it with small to medium diversions.
Small to medium-sized freshwater diversions will sustain the land pipeline sediment delivery builds. Large diversions might take decades to build what pipeline sediment delivery can do in just weeks or months. What about the cost of pipeline sediment delivery?
Right now, it's costing us about $20,000 an acre to create an acre of marsh. That's not too bad. Can we get cheaper? Yes, hopefully we can.
It's an investment of dollars because then you're talking about mechanically removing the sediment, and then it could be moving it great distances in pipelines and depositing it where you want it. I mean, so that's kind of the negative side. The positive side is that, you know, you get marsh built tomorrow.
There's no doubt that the cost of rebuilding will be great, but even greater will be the cost of doing nothing. The magnitude of what we stand to lose, should Louisiana's coast continue to erode, is far-reaching.
Well, we're basically fishing in a graveyard. Our habitat, the reason for our existence, for the plenty that we've experienced all of our lives, is dying. Most of the fish caught in the Gulf of Mexico, whether by commercial or recreational fishermen, are estuarine dependent, and most of those estuaries are here, and that's what's being lost. So the ripple effects will go through the ecosystem and will affect and impact sportsmen from all over the country and the world.
Everything that we do, our lives are kind of centered around what happens out there in the marsh. When all of that is gone and we no longer have the opportunity to go do that, our culture will change. And that shift in culture, I think in future generations, is going to be a great loss to us. You know, Louisiana is so vital to the country that sometimes I think we sell ourselves short.
40% of the wetlands in this country is off the coast of Louisiana. So the disappearance of that dramatically affects what we do with our seafood. And it's our wetlands that have made us strong. If we don't watch out and we become the sea in us, and that's it, no estuary, then we're not going to have the fishery we have here now.
We're the largest importer of rubber in the United States. We're the largest importer of plywood and wood products and building materials in the United States. And if we have any delays because of the law of supply and demand, somebody's going to be paying a little bit more for their socks or their computers up in Chicago next week.
I just challenge people and say, think about Katrina again and how much it cost every person in this country when they went to fill up their gas tank 2 weeks after Katrina. What's going to come out of your pocket for each individual person in this country as a result of us losing coastal Louisiana? And then say, is it worth it?
When these wetlands are gone, they're the primary defense against hurricane damage for the pipeline that serves the nation. A cab driver in Detroit owes part of his livelihood to these wetlands.
If I had less than a minute to tell people what they should be most concerned about, you know, I think of a couple sitting in a dark room on a sofa with blankets covering them, looking at a black TV screen and saying to each other, we should have saved coastal Louisiana, because truly they'll be freezing in the dark because of the lack of energy to sustain America as we know it today.
At some point, this bubble's going to burst and the coast is going to collapse. And we're at the verge of that coastal collapse. And we'll be so foolish not to take our science to know that we got to get out there and do something quickly. We got to rebuild the framework of the coast, and the only way to rebuild the framework of the coast, the framework being defined of the barrier islands, the marshes, and the ridges, is by man moving pipeline slurry and creating those landforms within timescales that means something to our children, our families, our society.
Imagine what our coastal heartland could be like for us and for future generations if we harvest to restore now. When will we acknowledge how much we all benefit from coastal Louisiana? When will we realize how many things that we take for granted are dependent upon the existence of these coastal lands? When will America's coastal heartland be restored? For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.